we discussed a sign before chapel that was, it's enough of the strumming, and it was the sign of the cross, because why not? We could just wrap up and leave after that, right? I mean, that was just like, woof, communion is, I mean, listen, I like to preach. I love sharing the word with people. Insider thing, I love communion way more than the word. Maybe that's selfish. I don't know if you can have your favorite, right? It's the love letter of Christ to humanity. But like, oh, it's so good to be able to be reminded through our taste buds that Jesus is Lord and that he loves us. I cannot describe to you the honor that I feel to be able to do this. I don't know if this is just me, but like First Chapel's like particularly stacked. I mean, like there are some really good people if you look around. I also, this is a disclaimer. I do not have a lot of time. This is a disclaimer here. I know Second Chapel is great. I may single-handedly be the reason why half of our freshman class fails Faith and Society this semester, because I was like, yeah, just come to chapel, you'll be blessed. You know, it's horrible. I mean, it's not like school endorsed, but it is Jono endorsed. So anyways, welcome, friends, to what I call the beautiful chapel, the aesthetically driven chapel, if that's you. If the only understanding you have of aesthetics is through Instagram, welcome to a whole new world, I pray. The reason why we reshape our loves through beauty is because we are not just brains on a stick, you and me. We are human beings with touch, with feelings, with passion, with joy, with a capacity for beauty. And Christ's invitation for us today is to enjoy him. Look at that. I mean, is that just not the best in the whole wide world? I don't know who Campus Min's graphic person is. I saw this and I just said to myself, nothing like some Byzantine art to really get you going on a Monday morning. That is awesome. That is awesome. So friends, if you have never worshiped Christ through the way a 0.5 Muji pen scrawls across a piece of hand-bound notebook, or tasted him in a Friday afternoon cup of hot chocolate, or borne witness to his simple majesty in a pair of pants that sit just right on your butt, my friends. I don't even have one. Anyways, my friends. I think I said that last time I preached to you. I don't know why this is a theme, but anyways, my dear friends, Christ wants to meet with you today, both in the intimate and the sacred, the lighthearted and the humorous. He is here for you. I come to you in the passage of Mark after two amazing sermons that our community got to listen through. We had two people. Coach Ken Crawford absolutely balled out. Not a pun, whatever. Okay, he did a great job. He was talking about Jesus as the real deal. I mean, that's money. Jesus, the real deal, right? I love the kind of colloquial, like, oh yeah, he's a baller. Like, Jesus is the real deal. A couple weeks ago, before we had that little break for President's Day, we had Dr. Helmke. She was talking about Jesus as the healer, right? That if you have any infirmities or sort of brokenness of soul, that Christ comes and he wants to heal. I want to propose to you today that the texts we're going to dive into, and we will read them, and they're awesome. They paint Jesus in a slightly different light. He is the real deal. He is the healer. But Jesus is the one that you and I cannot ignore. Jesus, the one you and I cannot ignore. The title of this sermon is Wine, Bread, and the Hands to Receive It. If you will, I'm going to read from you. I'm borrowing this from Seabass, my roommate. It is so pretty. We're doing a read-along thing anyways. Yeah, it's spectacular. So a little storybook, so I'll read through and show you the pictures afterwards. This one is Welch's grape juice right there, not Merlot. Okay, anyways, I'm going to read from Mark chapter 2, verse 18 through 22. We'll begin. Once, when John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting or hungry, some people came to Jesus and asked, "Why don't your disciples fast like John's disciples and the Pharisees do?" Jesus replied, "Do wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. They can't fast while the groom is with them, but someday the groom will be taken away from them and they will fast. Besides, who would patch old clothing with new cloth, leaving an even bigger tear than before? And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the wine would burst the wineskins, and the wine and the skins would both be lost. New wine calls for new wineskins, wine, bread, and the hands to receive it. We didn't really get a chance because of snow days to kind of preface Mark. I'm going to do this quickly. I think it matters, though, about kind of who we're reading this through. Mark is the gospel basically according to an 18-year-old boy. So if you're a freshman on the Wolfpack, like, rap, this is your understanding of Jesus. As we know, this was handed down from Peter, right? Mark he wasn't necessarily there at the very beginning, but as best we can decipher and scholars understand, that this is kind of the gospel of Jesus, the good news of Jesus according to Peter. Peter was a super hothead. I don't need to get into too much. Denies Jesus 3 times, total savage, one of Jesus' best friends. You always need someone with a little bit of crazy in your inner circle. You know who you are, okay? But anyways, the way that this is kind of literarily written, there is like no time to breathe throughout this entire gospel, okay? It is just one thing after the other. He goes immediately once more, like we're not sure, but like he might have ADD. Like he is like in the zone. Like it's not particularly like eloquently written or anything like that either. It's very to the point, this gospel according to Mark, which gives me hope that Jesus can still meet me too. But it starts with this unbelievable passage. This is the beginning of Mark's just total swagger. He says this: "This is the good news, Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. It is just as Isaiah had written." That is the first words of his entire gospel is, this is the good news, Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. Now this is loaded with like kind of political and social undertones as well that if you were to hear would have been extremely edgy at the time. But this is Mark laying out a manifesto that the God that we are talking about is not here to play around. He's serious. What he does is the very Siri. Oh, I said Siri and she said hi. Anyways, whatever. God is clearly here to play around. Anyways, but it pulls zero punches. Jesus does everything someone who is ingratiating themselves to a new society should not do. Do you mind if I just read a list of accomplishments of Jesus' ministry according to Mark? Can we just go through? I mean, it's about Jesus, so we're going to do this, okay? Just a quick list of accomplishments or antics, depending on who you are. Jesus is hailed as a king by a man in camel hair who eats crickets. Jesus strolls out to the desert for a month and a half, eats nothing, and talks to Satan himself. Jesus gets baptized by said camel hair boy, and then a dove lands on his shoulder and starts telling people the kingdom of God is here. Jesus picks 4 fishermen to start his crew. Jesus touches a highly infectious leper and told the guy to shut up and don't tell anybody. Jesus heals a guy who slid in through his thatched roof. Jesus hangs out with a corrupt IRS agent. Jesus is drinking alcohol and enjoying life. Jesus is having a snack on the Sabbath. Jesus claims he is the Sabbath. Jesus gains a multi-thousand person following. Jesus gets called a demon when he spends most of his ministry kicking out demons. Jesus tells a number of mysterious stories, oddly centered around wheat and mustard. And if you're confused, that's exactly what he intended. Jesus flexes on the weather twice. Jesus ruins an entire local economy by drowning 2,000 demon-possessed pigs. Jesus said a dead girl wasn't just dead, but sleeping, and then raises her from the dead as she was dead. Jesus feeds 4 Northwest universities with a few cod or something. Jesus calls the good religious guys dead men's bones in a marble casket. Jesus alludes to a Gentile woman as a dog, and she still adores him. Feminist Jesus, like, no, not good. Jesus feeds 3 Northwest universities with a couple of rye breads. Jesus calls the religious good guys yeast. Jesus goes all Star Wars on us and goes up to a mountain, becomes shining white, and catches up with Moses and Elijah, as you do, right? Jesus says anyone not against us is for us. Jesus says anyone who is not for us is against us. Jesus hugs toddlers. Jesus yells at a fig tree because there's no fruit. Jesus has had enough of your oppressive capitalist legalism in church. Jesus is down for taxes. Jesus likes 2 pennies better than a couple grand. Jesus talks about future wars and unfortunately pregnant women. Some woman uses her hair to perfume his feet. Don't try that one. Jesus is sold for some silver. Jesus tells people to eat his flesh. Jesus is abandoned by everybody. Jesus sweats blood. Jesus bleeds blood. Jesus' blood becomes the securing redemption of your life and mine. Please, friends, call Jesus an idiot. Call him the king of the universe. Call him possessed by a demon. But please, by all means, do not call him indifferent. He is anything but the run-of-the-mill man. The person that we encounter in the book of Mark is Christ, the Son of the living God. And you can make of that whatever you want, but the way he chooses to live is not ordinary. But it is the most full and beautiful life. Jesus is the one we can't ignore. What Jesus does in this text is beckons us into a new relationship with him that is vitally fun, innately beautiful, deeply peaceful, and overwhelmingly good. Let me just, one more time, if your life is like kind of sucking right now, just like, let me tell you what Jesus wants our lives to be about. I'm not saying it's gonna be easy. I'm not saying there's not trial and hardship. There's a cross, that's the way to the crown, but let me read you this. What Jesus does in this particular text is beckons us into a new relationship with him that is vitally fun, innately beautiful, deeply peaceful, and overwhelmingly good. Philosophers have spent the better part of 2,600 years trying to wrap their minds around and define the good, the true, the beautiful. And what I posit to you today is that here in our midst, in a warm lakeside village in the northeast of modern-day Israel, we have found it. Jesus is the true beauty. Jesus is what our souls have been longing for. And he tastes like well-cooked bread and good wine. I was talking to one of my best friends, Robert, and we were just having dinner for his birthday. And he reminded me of this, and I'll leave it with you. It says, Jesus, as we read through the Gospels, we must be reminded of this, that Jesus, every single action that he took is the embodiment of love in action. Every single action he takes is the embodiment of love. And so as I read you these stories, I want to call your attention to that because they're a little foreign to us, but they're amazing. He says this, one Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some grain fields, his disciples began breaking off heads of grain to eat. But the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath?" Jesus said to them, "Haven't you ever read?" Boom! In the scriptures, what David did when he and his companions were hungry. He went into the house of God during the days when Abiathar was priest and broke the law, David, by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. He also gave some to his companions. And then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people, not to meet the requirements of Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Continuing on. Jesus went into the synagogue again, maybe a week later or whatever, and noticed a man with a deformed hand. He was crippled as best you can imagine, impure, unable to enter into the temple by the Pharisees' law. Since it was the Sabbath, Jesus' enemies watched him closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the deformed hand, "Come and stand in front of everyone." And then he turned to his critics and said, "Does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath or evil ones? Is this a day to save life or to destroy it?" But they wouldn't answer him. And he looked around at them angrily and was deeply saddened by their hard hearts. Then he said to the man, "Hold out your hand." So the man held out his hand, and it was restored. At once, the Pharisees went away and met with the supporters of Herod to plot on how to kill Jesus. This whole scripture is phrased around that one sentence in chapter 2 where Jesus says, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath." What Jesus says to us is that all of our religious rites, all of our actions, all of our worship songs, all of our communions, he is the Lord over those. And in turn, if he is the Lord over the Sabbath, his way of living life is the way that is worth clinging to. He is saying to the Pharisees, there is a new, old way of life, and I have come to show you what that means. The way of Jesus is the only way of human flourishing. And through the motif of this story and of my own personal, the way of Jesus is the way of Sabbath. I do not have a ton of time, but can I just give you an idea as best I can understand of what these two compare, contrast lifestyles is? One is the lifestyle of Sabbath. The other is the lifestyle of self-righteousness. And I use self-righteousness as the opposite of Sabbath because it is being unable to rest in the work of God. Just two things. You know someone is living in the lifestyle of Sabbath if, one, they have an acute sense of humor, that they do not take life too seriously, that there's a little tongue-in-cheek, that there is a lightheartedness. You read through this, I'm not just making this up. Chapter 2 talks about Jesus, right? And he says, have you not read? To like the most amazing scholars in all of his day. He's like, haven't you read? Ha ha ha, got you. He's someone who's able to take life not too seriously, right? I'll leave it at that, but he has an acute sense of humor. They have a deep pleasure in life. Listen, if your teachers, I don't mean here at Northwest, but I mean the people you look up to, right? The people that you admire, if they're a bunch of stingy, like kind of bummer people, like they've never really enjoyed anything in their whole life, I promise you, they are not working in the lifestyle of Sabbath. They're working in the lifestyle of self-righteousness because this life is rich and meant to be enjoyed. If there are people with their cynical little eyes saying, enjoy that, but not too much, otherwise you might hurt yourself, right? Like, yes, part of the goodness of life is that there are some pleasures that are so good that we might be able to enjoy them too much. That's why Christ beckons us to use our minds and our friends to keep us in line. There is this deep pleasure in life itself, and there is this deep reasonableness. 3 verse 6, the Pharisees went away and met with the supporters of Herod to plot how to kill Jesus. Jesus, throughout this entire story, is asking questions of people with this lighthearted kind of grin. You get this heart that he's like, is it okay to do good on the Sabbath? He's like, why would you put new textile on an old thing that's gonna rip? Why would you waste your time on this? He asks them questions, but the Pharisees are completely unable to do so. Few marks of someone who's living under the lifestyle of Sabbath: an acute sense of humor, a deep pleasure in life itself, and a deep reasonableness in conversation. A lifestyle of self-righteousness, according to these stories. They are stingy-spirited, unable to welcome people because if they get in, then I cannot be brought up. There is this constant war against the other. That if you or I are not being put up, someone else needs to be put down in order to facilitate our joining. Jesus does exactly the opposite. They're exclusive in all the wrong ways. Not exclusive on the basis of like love or like there is actually a true good way of living, but because they like to oppress and push down. And they are unable to communicate in love. I think this is important for our cultural moments, friends. If your political persuasion or theological dogma make it impossible to hold an honest and uplifting conversation with someone else, Sabbath is not abiding in you or in me. We must be people of reasonableness. And yet that doesn't mean being meek or trampled over. Works-based righteousness is sinister, friends. It is destructive of all that is good, rich, and lovely in the world. Hear me. This is not just some lesser than life that Jesus is pushing down. He is saying to live under the yoke of our own self-righteousness is to be bound forever with Satan himself. But to live in life with Jesus, to take on his easy yoke, that is pleasure itself. That is goodness. That is life embodied in all of its fullness, even if it means pain, suffering, and trials. This is one of 5 times in the whole of the Gospels that Jesus got angry. And Jesus is angry because he is so satiated with Sabbath that he gets angry to let good wine go to waste in old wineskins. He is so angry because he cannot let beautiful, sublime textiles be sewn onto old clothing and a new, true way of life to be wasted on people who are irrevocably hardened to its goodness. Jesus is tender, he has a sense of humor, but Jesus knows when to be angry about oppression. And yet Christ offers all the while healing to the Pharisees. Do you notice the man with the deformed hand? They put him on the outsides, but the truth of the reality, friend, is that we all have a deformity of spirit. And I use that in a very tender way. If anyone here, maybe has a physical or otherwise deformity, I'm not using that in that term at all, just in a kind way through the scripture. We are all deformed, you and me. The fact of the matter is we all need a touch from Jesus to be made new. If we are not touched by Jesus, we remain in our state without him. And yet Christ offers his mercy to the Pharisees, to you, to me, that we would come. And Jesus is angry because the Pharisees are so exclusive, so stingy-spirited, and so hard-hearted that they are unable to be healed because of their own pride, myself included. I begin as I ended today. This is the story of Christ, the Son of the living God, full of life, the perfection of love, the perfection of anger. He is inviting you and I to feast at his table of delights, to lean back and take a deep drink of his Merlot of goodness, right? To have a snack on the Sabbath, to enjoy him. But friends, there are some that may not choose him, and I am confident in all good spirit that you will be the people that choose the good life of Jesus. It is better than you had ever imagined. It is difficult, of course. There's no way to get around that. But if you've ever loved something so much or loved someone so much, you know that the difficulty is not even worth comparing to the goodness and wonder of the prize that lies ahead of us. This is Christ's table, his feast of delights, friend. And he invites you to come and eat. Thank you.